Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our class today. Today's class will be covering two chapters of your final report. It's the evaluation chapter and the conclusion chapter. In the evaluation chapter, we're going to look at an evaluation of the usability of the application. What that means is that you're going to evaluate the application, not to check to see if the functions are working. That was already done in the testing chapter. Instead, what we'll be looking at in the evaluation chapter is to determine how well the application works. How does it handle error message? Does it gracefully give you error message in terms of responding? Because people often get panicky when they see an error message. So the whole idea is that the error messages should be well worded to provide enough information to help the user to recover from the error, because it gives you enough information to do so. For example, it looks for consistency in the screen, proper consistent layout, good choice of colors, use of fonts, image, layout, and those sort of things. So those are some of the things you're going to look at for the evaluation chapter. Now, like the testing chapter, the evaluation chapter is very similar in that they both do the same thing. Testing is to test functionality, evaluation is to evaluate the usability. Now, what you'll find is there's a mimicking of both chapters in terms of the structure, the logic, the layout, right? The only thing is the testing chapter tests the functionality or the functional requirements that you would have done in the functional requirements chapter, whereas the evaluation uses the heuristics that you would have come up with in the design chapter. So in the design chapter, you would have listed a series of heuristics. Our word for today is that when you're feeling like quitting, think about why you started. So that's our word today. When you feel like quitting, always remember why you started. You're almost at the end of this course, right? So if you think about quitting, and truth is that every semester there are students who do not submit their project. And if you're going to not submit your project, think about why you started, right? It's not too late to get started. It's not too late to complete this application as well. There's enough time for you to get things done and get your application completed. All right. So just remember that whenever you feel like quitting. In terms of the chapters, right, this is an overview of the various chapters as well. And we're on now to the evaluation and conclusion chapter, which is our last two chapters of the technical report. So in terms of evaluation, this is what is included here. From the briefing sheet, right, they indicated this might include some evaluation of your software, and if so, you should report on the outcomes. Now, that's all the information they have on the briefing sheet side of it. Now, for the chapter, in the structure of this chapter, it's very much like the testing chapter, the structure, the layout. Every chapter, there's an introduction, and by now you should be familiar with what the role of the introduction is, to discuss why is this chapter important and what will be covered in this chapter. And in terms of what is covered, we look at a method of evaluation. You should justify the method using for evaluating the application, and there are multiple approaches to do so. All right. Then we will do the actual evaluation itself. We will then provide the heuristic report. Now, what the heuristic report is, in the testing chapter, you would have had something called the defects log. The defects log is what you use to record all program defects. In the heuristic report is the equivalent of the defects log. It records any defects from a heuristic perspective. So it's called the heuristic report, which logs all the heuristic or all the shortcomings. And then you have your analysis of results. So let's get into each section. For the introduction, as I've always indicated, the purpose of the introduction is to indicate how the importance of this chapter, why is the evaluation chapter important, and two, it will discuss the method of evaluation, which is heuristic evaluation, and what will be covered in this chapter. Okay, so for example, the first part discusses why evaluation is important. The second paragraph here discusses what is covered in this chapter. So here goes. Evaluation is an absolutely vital step in the software development process. Releasing application that contains usability issues will result in more frustrated users, more calls to the support line, as well as customers that stop using your product. The evaluation phase ensures that this forethought about the user's need and goals was or was not accurate. The general goal of most evaluations is to provide useful feedback to a variety of audience that may include the sponsors, the donors, client groups, administration staff, and other relevant stakeholders. In this case, it's the academic team at UH. This chapter is not about whether your application works. That was answered in the testing chapter. But what it covers is how well it works, how usable is it. So this chapter focuses on evaluating the application or the usability of the application through the use of a heuristic evaluation. So that's the introduction. In terms of the method of evaluation, as I indicated, we'll be using a heuristic evaluation. Now, in terms of doing the heuristics, you would have already identified the heuristics you'll be evaluating on in the design chapter. So you're using Nielsen's 10 principles, and for each of the principles, you would have had a checklist. So the method you're using is to do the heuristic evaluation. You basically are the expert user who is going to do the heuristic evaluation. So therefore, there's no need for ethics approval because you are doing the evaluation. If any one of you would have gotten ethics approval and you are using other persons to evaluate it, then your method of evaluation may be different, right? So this is an example of what you'll cover in the heuristic evaluation, right? So while there are several methods of evaluating a software, the one used for this application will be heuristic evaluation being conducted by the student. Although usability.gov recommends that heuristic evaluation should be done in conjunction with usability testing, the latter requires testing with representative users, which requires ethics approval. Given the potential delays in seeking ethics approval, it was not considered feasible for the project. UX Matters suggests that a limitation of heuristic evaluation is that it lacks subjectivity and is not possible to measure customer satisfaction. Heuristic evaluation was chosen because it was a quick, cost-effective way of finding usability problems with an interface. It's formal and objective. So what we've just done here, you've justified the method, or you've indicated the method of evaluation, which is heuristic evaluation. You've indicated the positives of heuristic evaluation as well as the drawbacks of it. And you've indicated quickly why you have chosen this method, right? Now, in terms of continuing now the heuristic evaluation, we look at how we go about it. So the heuristic evaluation used for this project is a checklist that was based on the 10 usability principle derived by Nielsen and Mullick, which were outlined in the design chapter of this report. Now, just to run through, you should remember this table in the design chapter, right? When we did the design chapter, we would have done these tables here, right? So just a note now how we're going to do it. So in the design chapter, you already had this table, which is like for each of the heuristic 1.1, 1.2, etc. And you would have had the review checklist. What we're adding now is this last column here called the rating, whether it was fully, partially, or fully implemented, not implemented, or partially implemented, right? So based on this now, we're just going to mention now the approach we're using. So the heuristic evaluation used for this project is a checklist that was based on 10 usability principles derived by Nielsen and Mullick, which were outlined in the design chapter. For each item in the checklist, the evaluation will determine if the heuristic was not implemented, partially implemented, or fully implemented across the entire application. As such, a rating was used to represent the survey, whereby 0 indicates not implemented, 1 partially, and 2 it fully implemented. Now, please note, which ones of these 0, 1, and 2 would you think will go in your defects log? Well, in this case, it's called a heuristic log. Which one would you put in your log? The log is to record anything that needs further work. Would you put the ones that are 2, which is fully implemented, the ones that are 1 partially, or the ones that are 0? So just to give an example, look at this here. This is evaluation heuristic 1, which is the checklist. So for heuristic 1, it checks to see, does every display begin with a title or header that describes the screen content? So what you're going to do with this, you're going to check every screen in the application. And if all of them satisfy it, you will put 2 fully implemented. The fact that this is partially implemented means that it was not implemented on all the screens. Is there consistent icon design and stylistic treatment across the system? 2 fully implemented means across all screens it was implemented, etc., and so on. So based on these here, which one you think will go in the defects log? Will any of them go in your, well, heuristic report? What are your thoughts? All right, so the first one, if you notice at the top says, it says in this instance where the heuristic was not implemented or partially implemented, the full details will be recorded in the heuristic form, right? So basically, anytime it's 0 or 1, then you'll go to the heuristic form. But if it's 2, which is fully implemented, there's no need to send it in the heuristic form, in the heuristic log, because the heuristic log is really to determine those that need further work. So only if it's 0 or 1, then you'll put it there. So table 18 below shows the result of evaluating the system using Nielsen's first principle, which is visibility of system status. Appendix 22 has the full evaluation of all 10 principles. Now, just a note, this here basically is each evaluation, you indicate whether it's fully, partially, etc. This is one approach to it. Here's another approach to it. The fact that 1.1 was partially implemented means that it wasn't fully implemented on every screen. Another approach to doing the evaluation is, instead of doing it like this, what you do is you have the same 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, but what you do is these are every page. So these are every one of the page, you indicate whether it was fully implemented. So notice all of these features were fully implemented on all the page except 1.1. It was not implemented on the view card. And because it was not implemented here, it is listed as partially implemented. And therefore, when you have to fix it, you have to add this feature on the view card page, right? Include the header or title on the view card page. So that is why this came up as partially implemented. So this is another approach. So instead of having it, instead of having this whole thing as in this slide here, where you just indicate partially or fully implemented, you show for each screen whether it was implemented or not. So this is another approach to doing it, more like a matrix as opposed to here, right? So that's your option. And you do the same for all heuristics. So ideally, you need to repeat heuristic evaluation using all the 10 checklists, right? And they will go in the appendix, right? So for example, these slides are just to reiterate. So this is Heuristic One, visibility of system status. You indicate if it was fully or partially implemented. Heuristic 2, Heuristic 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm restating all the heuristic, and you have to fill in these, right? Now, at the end now, the heuristic report is to log each non-conformance, right? Now, when you log in heuristic report, anything that had a 0 or 1 would be logged in heuristic report, right? So based on that now, what you will do when you log it in heuristic report, you then give it a severity rating. The severity rating will indicate how important it is or to prioritize it, right? And that will determine the order which you will fix. So just as an example now, let's say this is the heuristic report. You will use a rating. 0 means I don't agree that it was a usability problem. 1 is a cosmetic problem, doesn't need to be fixed urgently. 2 is a minor usability problem, right? Fixing is low priority. 3 is major usability problem. It's important to fix, high priority. And 4 is a catastrophe. It's a usability catastrophe, and it's imperative that you fix this, right, before it is released. So what you do now is in the heuristic report, this is an example of your write-up. The heuristic report is used to log each non-conformance from the heuristic evaluation. A non-conforming item is one that receives either 0 for not implemented or 1 partially implemented in the heuristic evaluation. The intention of this is to track each area where the application has failed to meet the heuristic so that it can be rectified. Each entry in the log is given a severity rating, which is a guide on how the non-conformance will impact the system and will be used as a priority list for fixing the logs. The severity rating is used to determine the likely impact of the usability problem this was determined using a combination of 3 factors: the frequency, how often problem occurs; 2, the impact, will it be easy or difficult for users to overcome; and 3, persistence, is it once in a while or will users be repeatedly bothered by this problem? So based on these, a severity rating scale was used from 0 to 4, where 0 is cosmetic and should only be fixed if time allowed, while 4 is a major catastrophe if not fixed urgently, right? And the following shows the heuristic report at the end of the evaluation. There were 15 items logged, of which 10 were partially implemented and 5 were not implemented. So this is an example. So entry 1 is test 1.1. Does every display begin with a title or header? Where is it violated? The view card page does not have a title. This has a severity rating of 2. And the comment is if you're able to fix it or not. A title view card was added to the page, problem resolved, etc. So for each one, you indicate whether you're able to resolve it or not. You give it a severity rating and indicate if you're able to solve it or not, right? And that's how you do your heuristic report. And then the last part is the analysis of result. Just like in the testing, you indicate how many heuristics there were, how many fully implemented, how many were partially or not implemented and were in the heuristic report, and from the heuristic report, how many were solved, how many were not solved, right? So based on that, an example will be, the results are summarized, and from each of the evaluation review carried out, the results suggest that 45 of the 60 checklist items were fully implemented. There were 10 checklist items that were partially implemented and 5 that were not implemented. Both sets were recorded in the heuristic report, which was used for recording all violations to the heuristic evaluation. 12 of these 15 violated items were corrected. The remaining 3 defects were not corrected because of insufficient time available. However, these defects were of low severity and therefore do not pose a threat to the usability of the application, right? And that is your analysis of result. And that brings us to the conclusion of the evaluation chapter. Our next chapter that we're going to look at is the conclusion chapter. But before we get into the conclusion chapter, we're going to have a brief discussion, if you participate, that is, right? Often when you know, like in primary or secondary school, when you read a story, there's always like a moral, or you know, there's a moral to the story at the end. And the moral of the story is about what lesson did you learn from it? Because everything should really, every experience should teach us lessons or so, right? If this was your story, if I could get from you some of the things that you'd probably do differently if you had the chance to do it again, would any one of you want to share? And each of you, if you can, share something in terms of, like, tell me a skill that you may have learned from the project, or something that, you know, you might have done differently if you had the chance to do it over again, right, etc. Any lessons learned from this at all? What, or it could be a lesson learned, things you would do differently, something maybe that you have you know, something you've gained, right? Like project management, time management, etc. Anything you might want to share now that you look back on this. Has it made you better in terms of appreciation of the field of information technology, etc., right? If you can share anything regarding the module as we look back, because that's what the conclusion chapter is about. It's about looking back and sharing your experiences. Would you guys mind just sharing any experience that you've had at the end, now that you look back at this whole thing, right? You're seeing the guy at the summit now, he's conquered, right? How do you feel now at the end when you look back? Anything you do differently, anything you change, or anything that you felt that you learned? What was the thing you appreciate the most in terms of the learning that you've had from it? If I could get you guys to share, please. Anyone there?
Rafi, I think with me, my experience is that time management. Um, I think I learned to better manage time, not perfectly, but better. And if I had to do it differently, I would do better than that.
What would you do in terms of your time management? What would you change? Is it that you would probably, you know, like, in order to manage your time better, right? Would you do this module on its own maybe, or would you instead, let's say, maybe choose a different project or something? Or is it that, you know, anything that you would, so while I understand it's about managing your time, right? Anything that you would change in terms of your like, is it that you did this course with another module and you felt that it was maybe the doing both of them at the same time was a bit cumbersome? Or is it that simply you felt that you've just procrastinated too much? What are some of your thoughts on that? You felt it was more procrastination?
I think it was a lot more procrastination, but also because I did it with web script and time management was kind of poor on my side because we take for granted the different tasks and subtasks that has to be done.
Did any one of you think you underestimated the project in terms of the amount of work that was involved? Anyone else? Anyone, in terms of, did you underestimate, overestimate the amount of work required? You know, did you think that it was suitable for the time, etc.?
I think it was expected the amount of work that we had to put in for this, because based on the international guidelines that we need to follow. It's not going to be easy for us to go through the system. It's not just that we pay for the course and we come and we do it and we get the certification. We have to work hard for it.
No problem. But we're all humans as well, and sometimes we overestimate and underestimate sometimes our things. So, like in some cases, and I agree with Neiman that I think a lot of students tend to procrastinate a lot as well. For some students, though, this was a like in terms of project management, that was there are some students who have done very well in terms of managing the project. Like for example, and if it's okay, Shania, for example, has already completed all her 10 chapters, right? A draft. The only thing she needs to do is just to tidy up one or two things, but she's completed the entire report already, right? And she's just finalizing applications. So that's just one case of a student using her time differently than another and managing the project differently as well, Um, in terms of learning, what if you had to go back and redo this, right? This course, what would you change, Cecil? For you, would there be anything that you would change about your approach to this course, etc.? Now I know you've been doing very well in the course, so but is there anything you personally would change about it?
Well, my weak point was is web designing and programming and stuff. So for me, if I had more time allotted, I would have done some more work on program design and trying to do the web design better. Maybe try to get higher marks. That again, that's if more time was available to me.
Understood. In terms of getting more time, is there any one of you might be available to take like vacation and stuff like that? Because these are other options as well. So like maybe like in hindsight, when you look back, you realize that look, in order to achieve the full set of functional requirements that you set out to achieve, you needed to allocate more time. And therefore, maybe with proper planning, you might have been able to allocate like some of your vacation leave from work towards the project, etc., so that you'd be able to achieve some of these. It's just a suggestion in terms of when you look back and you reflect on it as well, right? Um, in terms of the any other skill or any other areas that you want to consider or want to reflect on, any one of you had any, what about like academic writing, research skills and those things? Are those things that you felt that you improved on through the project?
For me, Ravi, I think I would have planned better and do the database design before as much as possible rather than having a skeleton the database and keep going back and forth as the need came up to design and add to the design and so on.
If you, in terms of like the classes with Marcus, which is building the application, every week Marcus has been doing functionality, right? Now I'm not part of the class, but I know he does the functionality and he provides videos and stuff like that. In terms of from an outsider looking in, for the resources, you have videos, you have an actual class where he does the stuff, plus you have access to the videos as well, which you can repeat as many times as you want to get it done. Having those resources, but at the same time, what do you think might some of the reasons why students may not have completed all the functional requirements that were done in the video based on what the video captures? Any reason why someone may not have, that you think that we can look at improving for future? Although this is our last class in this program, but even in hindsight, looking at it. And that's for everyone, and not just the two persons who may be speaking, others as well. What would you change in terms of our approach with the videos, the classes, the video tutorial, etc.?
Ravi, based on the current style of like having class and having that option to go back to the videos, I found it very effective. However, I could see issues when you ask like what could have been people's issues about not submitting or finishing to a certain point of completeness by now. If you wait, procrastination, we all know we procrastinate depending on what's going on in our lives, especially since this is something distance learning and you're not in direct contact. and where your milestone is one that is further along. I know the IPR was there, but when you procrastinate, I like for 1 week, I may have been behind and I felt overwhelmed, and that was just 1 week. So I could just imagine somebody who, they have other things going on and it's a little bit harder to keep up with the class. It would have been a lot if you wait too long to start coding, or even with
Part.
your two chapters. I tried my very best. Look, right now, it's like to keep up with the pace of the class. If you want to do that, finish that two chapter completion in like a week or two, it's a lot, depending on how many hours you're able to commit per day to it.
Agreed. Especially for working people who are also mothers or parents as well. It is,
Yes.
honestly. Um, for me, one of the reasons why I'm trying to finish early is because you have all this stuff now, and you can now, your turn now to just go and do the write-up. But we've covered this stuff, and you can now. So the intention is not necessarily that you do 2 chapters every week, and but by having covered it as well, and you have the resources available and the video guides, you can always go for it and then write your chapters as you go along, but pace yourself, because there's no absolute need that you must do all the chapters, 2 chapters every week and finish by, let's say, by end of July. The truth is that you could pace yourself. The main thing is that you finish the project maybe around, cater to finish around the 20th or 22nd of August or so. So you have ample time to go over it, check for errors, grammatical, make sure your referencing is tight and is correct, etc., and that sort of thing. I think often too as well, G, and from talking to other students, many of them start very late in the written part of it. The application part, generally they have been working bit by bit, but a lot of times as well, students if they're behind, they don't seek help and they don't ask for help also. And often they probably think, well, eventually when I'm ready, I'll get the help, etc. And then they never get to the point of being ready for the help. And sometimes they may feel a bit embarrassed to ask as well. The other thing too is they simply underestimate the amount of the effort required in order to complete the write-up. So they wait very much closer to deadlines, and by then they start feeling overwhelmed, and then eventually it feels insurmountable, and therefore sometimes they quit. Rather than submit an incomplete report with an incomplete application, they just quit. I want to share with you guys as well. From many past, remember, we've been doing this since 2006. And I've had many students in the past who submitted incomplete applications, incomplete report, or a complete report with an incomplete application, or a complete report on a complete application, and different permutations of those as well. And the reality is that the persons, is very rare when I look at the marking scheme to see someone who submitted a final report and fail. It's very, very rare someone submits a final report and fail. And that will ideally only happen if you submit a final report that is the same as the IPR, like you just submit only like two or three chapters, as opposed to you have, and you don't need to finish all your chapters to pass, but sometimes students just submit 2 or 3 chapters as well. And my take on it is that, worst case, even if you did a good IPR and you use back your IPR, you take that whole IPR and put it in your final report, and you don't complete much more, you could still almost get a passing grade once you have an application with some functionality in it, right? So, but a lot of times students don't see it as the passing anymore. They just I give up, and they find it's easier to give up than to continue to try. So we really want to encourage you guys. The truth is that we can all succeed. Whether you're now going to start, right? The fact is you can achieve these things here. There are numerous samples. You could read a sample and you could get ideas. You could read the slides, get ideas as well, and then you get started. My general take on it is read 1 or 2 samples, read the slides as well, just to get an adjust, and then you figure out what is the best, that for you, and then you go ahead and you start writing. As I said, it's rare to ever see a student who submit a final report where they've done the bulk of the report and they have failed. It's highly unusual that ever happens, right? So once you submit a final report, you pass pretty much, and that's generally the norm. So just to encourage you guys again, okay? Well, if it's all right, let's get into our conclusion chapter, right? And our presentation for the class. This is the shortest chapter. They're just 22 slides or so. And of course, about 5 of the slides is just to reiterate you know, what is going to be covered in this class, etc. Right? So let's get started with this one. So the conclusion chapter, we've reached the end and we're looking back. We are reflecting. We are sharing our experiences, right? We are telling the university how we felt about the whole thing, and we are sharing like how you felt about the journey, right? And this is what it is about. It's a personal story here, but that personal story as well should not be one of only triumphs. It should also be one of tribulations. It's about one of overcoming challenges and stuff like that. The more you write about overcoming challenges and obstacles and how you got over them, over these hurdles as well, it makes a richer reading. So sometimes I would encourage you as well to create some obstacles, if you want to call it that, in your write-up, right? Rather than just say, well, look, this didn't work, that didn't work. Figure out what you would have done to try to make it work as well. Okay, so our word for today is, don't wait until you reach your goal to be proud of yourself. Be proud of every step you take towards achieving your goal. G, early on today, you said that you didn't complete 2 chapters and you felt overwhelmed, etc., because you want to keep up with the class. If I've read chapter 8, you want to read chapter 8 as well by the end of the week, etc. Right? The reality is that based on your past performance, you will get there. But the fact is that every one of you, always be proud of the achievements you've made as you go along. Right? It's good to be critical of yourself, but it's also good to you know, to appreciate the learning and the growth that is happening as well in the background. You know, as Cecil said, you know, look, you're not going to get this on a platter in terms of, you know, the program. You have to work for it. And the truth is that sometimes the more you perspire, the more you appreciate the outcome at the end as well. Okay, so in terms of our chapter, this is our last chapter, which is the conclusion, and it brings to an end now all the other stuff we would have done. So we would have covered almost everything on this slide here with the exception of the conclusion. Okay, so the other things will be a bibliography or your references and your appendices, and I think you're quite familiar with now how to compile those. This is your last module, so you should have been familiar with those from other assignments and reports. So in terms of the conclusion chapter, what does the university expect? So if you read the assignment briefing, right, this is generally what they would want you to include here. It is crucial that this chapter contains a self-critical reflection of the extent to which you have achieved the objectives you have set. You are not going to be penalized for acknowledging you failed to achieve all the objectives, especially not the advanced one. So you're expected not to achieve all the advanced objective, but you will certainly be criticized if you give the impression of not even noticing that you failed to meet an objective or even forgotten about them altogether. So the extent to which you've demonstrated the ability to reflect on your work is very important, and you need to be critical of yourself in this chapter. In terms of the structure of it, we look at the following. You'll have an introduction, you look at the task completed. So you review on the task that was done, you critically appraise now the product that you've built, and then you focus on the experiences you have gained, right? So those are the 3 areas we're going to look at here. In terms of the introduction, as I said, it always includes the purpose of this chapter, what is this chapter about, right? And what will be covered in this chapter. So an example will be, the student was required to undertake a complex individual project. This was an academic exercise based on the creation of a practical artifact that included the writing of a substantial technical dissertation. The final chapter of this report is the culmination of the work done and the experiences gained during the project development. This chapter highlights my success and the things I would do differently should I have the chance to do them again. This chapter also takes a critical outlook of the software artifact. So the first thing we're going to look at is the task completed. Now, based on this thing now, remember you are required to build an application. Here, you will make mention of the requirements that you've completed, which ones you were not able to complete, etc. So you're summarizing now. Now, some of this you may have mentioned before, but now you're simply summarizing in terms of what you're able to achieve and the extent to which you were able to achieve it. So state the tasks that you've actually completed, right? You could use your list of requirements, right? And extract from this list the tasks that you've completed. If it was done previously in the implementation chapter, then you could simply give a summary of how many tasks were completed and point to the appendix for the full list of the requirements, right? For the tasks that were completed, state if any of them were done different from how you intended to from the storyboard in the design chapter. For the tasks that you did not complete, indicate what problems you experienced that caused them to incomplete, and indicate what you did to overcome them, even though you may not have solved it. So for example, the requirements chapter outlined 25 tasks to be completed in the project. Of these, 16 were completed based on the specification. The most significant of these accomplishments were the use of the process funnel in designing the card checkout feature, as well as use of referral algorithms and responsive design technique. The full list of requirements achieved can be found in Appendix 27. At all times, effort was made to ensure the storyboard and the application remain consistent. However, this was not always achieved. The implementation of the product detail page was different from the design because, and indicate why it was different. These were detailed in the implementation chapter. Of the 9 tasks that were not implemented, efforts were made to have them done. These efforts included looking at similar implementation online as well as looking at alternative options. As indicated in the implementation chapter, some of the reasons for not being implemented were due to challenges in learning the coding to execute these features, as well as the lack of time as the assignment became due. So we've covered the 3 points that were mentioned, right? In the terms of the product built now, right? Discussed here, right? I want you to critically value the product. While you might big up your product, also recognize the shortcomings, the drawbacks. And it's okay to be honest about the drawbacks and stuff like that. How does it stand up as a software application that might be used by a third party? What I mean by that is, if, for example, I were to purchase your software to use, is it ready to be used commercially, or is it still lacking a lot? What are the strengths of the application? What do you think are the major weaknesses of it? And what are its limitations? So for example, given the 12-week duration to complete the project along with a long list of deliverables, it is reasonable to assume that there will be some flaws in the software artifact. This application pales in comparison to known websites such as Amazon. Well, you will compare it with other learning management sites, right? To Amazon. However, from an academic exercise that was created by a student who is new to programming, there are many strengths of the system. One of the key strengths is the database development, which uses a top-down approach. The tables were normalized to normal form. With a normalized database, it eliminated update anomalies. Other strengths include the implementation of several of the advanced features, including the use of process funnel design, responsive design, which allows the working on various screen sizes, the implementation of the recommender algorithm, as well as use of gamification feature. These are features typical of many e-commerce applications. An inherent weakness in the application is the need for improved design aesthetic. The use of professional images as well as multiple images for a given product, as well as marketing-friendly product description can improve the impact of the application. Other areas of weakness include the usefulness, context, and emotional impact. All right. Based on personas developed, the need for one-click checkout would assist persons who are looking at purchasing a single item who do not have much time available for lengthy checkout procedures. Additionally, to encourage users to shop, the application currently requires users to register before they can add items to the cart. However, a preferred approach would be to allow users to add items to the cart first and register in order to check out. So basically what we've done here is we looked at some of the shortcomings of the application that would make it a commercially viable application. In terms of limitation, there are some limitations to the software being used as a third-party software for public usage. The use of multiple payment options, including PayPal and cryptocurrency, as well as integration of credit card payment. More professional graphics and videos on the website will be helpful, as well as for a given item, the ability to choose the size and color. The application has not been fully tested to ensure it could withstand security threats or high traffic loads. So those are some limitations of the application if you're going to consider it as a commercial application where people can purchase. And the last thing now is you're going to talk about the experiences gained. In terms of the experiences gained, just a second, I'm seeing some items for the chat. My apologies if I didn't address these before. Let me just check it out for me. All right, okay, now, okay, these are, all right. These are some students' feedback. They suggested more emphasis on the front-end design and incorporating Nielsen heuristic. Cool. And I would say time management and patience. Gotcha, guys. All right. So in terms of experiences gained, and this is one where you're being more reflective now and you're looking at it and thinking, what could I do differently? You look at a range of different skills you would have gathered as well. So it's not about your own personal shortcomings, but where you were victorious as well. So a big part of the conclusion chapter is really for you to discuss your experiences throughout the project. What were some of the experiences you gained, and what were some of the areas you have improved in, and what were some of the things you have learned? In this section, you should give a personal account of your performance during the project. Try to assess what you have learned during the process and how that might help you with other endeavors. This is really a critical analysis and evaluation of your personal abilities and capabilities, right? So the following slides give you some idea of what other students have typically written on. So some of the things you might write on here would be, for example, right, you can reflect on the process rather than the product. So we already discussed the product, but tell us about the process. Did you follow an appropriate methodology, right? The cycle, did you properly utilize the life cycle, etc.? What were some of the significant elements in your experience? Like, what were the most difficult accomplishments? What were the things that did not work out as intended? Abstract from and generalize about your experience. Like, what would you do differently if you wanted to undertake another project of this nature? What have you learned about your own strengths and your own weaknesses? Often students choose to write about like project management, time management, personal development like research skill, critical thinking, evaluation skills, discipline, dedication, that sort of thing. Some students reflect on knowledge gains such as on learning PHP, SQL, etc. And some of them talk about the appropriateness of the software development approach. In terms of this, you don't just have to talk about the positives, you could also talk about the negatives as well, right? Okay, so based on this, let's look at some example. In terms of project management, this is what a student indicated about project management. I recognize the importance of developing a plan to help effectively manage my project. The plan evolved over the course of the project. Specifically, having a detailed plan allowed me to identify at an early stage that the originally planned timescale for implementation were unrealistic. This was largely due to underestimating the amount of time required to learn and apply new language and technologies that I had chosen for my project. I originally intended to learn PHP, HTML, CSS, and SQL in parallel with the system development. However, this proved to be impractical as I had to acquire a certain level of knowledge of these technologies before implementation could commence. This lack of knowledge, together with my own inexperience in managing a project of this scale, meant that the task I had identified for the implementation phase in my initial plan did not precisely capture the amount of work required to complete all the objectives in section, well, whichever section had the objectives. By having an initial plan that that contained a contingency factor, I was able to revise my planning schedule to reflect more accurately on work necessary. Unfortunately, this meant I had to amend the project scope, revising some of the objectives. Again, taken from other students, applying theoretical principles to solve a practical problem. As stated in section 1.2, through my studies, I had already gained a general overview of database design and some practical experience. Undertaking this project enabled me to apply and expand this existing knowledge by developing a standalone database system. In particular, I discovered the importance of normalization and ER modeling to effectively capture the data that had to be stored on the system and the relationship which existed between the data. In addition, I learned to capture user requirements through use case analysis, as well as develop potential user interface design through use of storyboards, right? And those are just some examples of things you write, and you have to basically, this is your story, so you have to write about your own set of experiences as well, okay? And this really now brings us to the end now of the final report. We've completed all the different chapters as well, and you should be able to write. The truth is, you could just make up a lot of these stuff as well. It's about writing skill is really crucial, but also if you kept a journal and you narrated some of the things that impacted you as well, it could make for a really good write-up. So you always encourage as well to narrate your story as you go along, make jotting notes as well, because some of the things you remember as a problem, you might forget it when you have to start writing. All right, so when you get to the chapter to write about it, you forget about it because it happened too long ago. Anyway, so guys, we've concluded now our session, and this brings us to the end of our class. This is your last class with me in the BSc program. at least the last formal class, unless we have any other makeup to do. Definitely, it's not our last interaction. I expect that, for many times we'd meet. You guys, when you're in the area, I'd love for you to fall in. Send me a text message or WhatsApp message whenever, if you need a reference or recommendation, whatever it is, I'm here. Don't ever feel, well, I didn't talk to anyone for so long, I feel bad. It's never about that. I'm not here to measure those things. I'm always, always honored when, students, send me a message, hey, how you doing, etc. Or just ask for advice or just to talk as well. It's always wonderful because you guys mean a lot to me. To be quite honest, you guys are the joys of the whole CTS experience to me. And you are the reason why I love doing what I do. Anyway, I don't know if there are any other stuff we need to discuss as well. Any one of you, is there any other thing we need to look at also, guys?
Not from my end, Ravi.
No problem. Well, as I said, I'm always available if you need anything, you want to chat or you want to go through the report, etc. Now, what I'm doing, because what I would encourage you to do, your first point is to get your supervisor at the university to review, because they have been reviewing. I think Kufri has been reviewing chapters. What's her name again? Mina has been reviewing chapters, and Mina has given very detailed review because often she'll copy me on her feedback as well. I'm not sure if everybody else is like Maria, etc. Any one of you has Maria as your supervisor? Any one of you supervisor is Maria? All right, I guess, but if any one of you have not been getting feedback from your supervisor when you submit your work as well, based on that, my recommendation is submit your work to your supervisor, get feedback from them, because they are the one who's marking your work, and therefore their supervisor is more crucial for you, right? And afterwards, after they've reviewed all of them, if you want, I could always take a review after, but it's preferred that you get your initial feedback from them first, and then afterwards, after you've made all your changes as well, then you could probably send to me and I could make further suggestions from there, right? That might be the preferred. Of course, if you want to just send it to me, that's no problem as well. But definitely, because they are the ones who marking your project, they would know exactly what they're looking for. And because this is highly subjective, you may find that, for example, Kufri may mark on a different scale than would Amina, or with Maria or Ghani, as the case may be. Every one of them would have marked differently. So you're encouraged as well, therefore, to send it to them to get their feedback as well. All right. So that concludes our class today. I'm going to send out upload these slides, email the slides to you guys. It's already in the shared drive. Apart from that, the video recording will take a bit to upload. So it has to convert first, and then I'll upload it to YouTube. So hopefully by later tonight, you should have access to all of these. And you'll always have access to me. You have my number as well. So feel free to reach out at any time. Okay. Anyway, guys, all the best. And this is Ravi Raghunath signing off from Zoom. All right. Have a good night, guys. Take care.
Thanks so much, Ravi.
You're welcome.
And thanks, Ravi, for your time and patience with us.
No problem.
Our success definitely is a reflection of your commitment as a lecturer and the amount of effort that you really put into your lectures. So kudos on that.
Thanks so much, G.